Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
What you really want is you want to literally be able to walk over the wall, break the glass, grab the plan and say, okay, we're ready. We trained for this. What do we do? Down to the point where you've trained on it and had drills, where you have an incident response plan and you've literally had a drill where you call everybody up at 9 o'clock at night and say, we've got a problem. Who gets the phone calls? Where do they meet? How fast do they get on the line?
If your company is collecting data, and every IoT company collects data, then it needs a formal information security program. We've talked risk assessment in the past, that is, the process of assigning liability to each potential security breach, but that's only part of the program. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with John Ansbach about the rest of the information security program, impending regulation, and privacy concerns.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is made possible by sales of my book, IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, and the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional, or ICIP, online training and certification program. Become a certified IoT professional by completing the program's 3 courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com. That's www.iot-inc.com. With me today is John Ansbach. John is currently General Counsel at General Data Tech. He has over 20 years' experience practicing law, half of that time leading in-house legal departments. At GDT, he leads teams that are responsible for information security, internal IT infrastructure, global operations, and audit. I met John when I was in Dallas for an engagement with GDT, and after talking with him, I thought he'd be great on the show. John, welcome.
Thanks, Bruce. Good to be here.
So what type of IoT activity have you been up to lately?
Gosh, our company has a couple of things that are in the fire right now. Hopefully we get an opportunity to participate in, but we've got some interesting smart cities opportunities that we're talking with that really run the gamut. Everything from IoT connected waste management to monitoring and automated solutions for a couple of different municipalities. So some really cool stuff that's happening right now.
Excellent, excellent. Now, how long has GDT been looking for this type of business, IoT business?
So our company is almost 20 years old. Started from pretty humble beginnings. Ooh. Our CEO and founder literally started off selling network infrastructure, I think out of the back of his car or his garage or something. So we've come from humble beginnings. We're about a $600 million VAR right now. Okay. We really, in the last 3 years, I think it's probably fair to say, have developed and actively pursued IoT projects and opportunities. Some of that initiated on our end, but a lot of that activity really initiated from our customers, folks that we would traditionally have conversations with about, typical infrastructure, router, server, switches, now starting to ask about, hey, what is the Internet of Things? Do you think there's something in the way of a product or service that could benefit our company? Those conversations are happening from not really procurement people, but more on the lines of CIOs, CTOs. And we've been really very fortunate to be in a position to have those conversations. We've got folks here who specialize in that. We have an IoT practice lead. And then we've got great partnerships with a number of other OEMs, Cisco, HP, EMC, a lot of folks that are obviously playing heavy in the space that can bring products and services to bear. So we're excited about these conversations. They're really, really interesting conversations, and I think they've got a lot of value to add to business going forward.
Yeah, and you're a little bit of a techie, aren't you?
I like to say that I am. I usually just tell people that I'm a geek. I used to say I'm a technology guy, but when I got to work at GDT, I met some real technology guys.
Yeah, the real deal.
With actual designations and certs behind their names. So I like to say I'm an enthusiast. I'm just enough of a geek to be dangerous, I guess.
All right. Well, why don't you start? Well, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and specifically, I mean, you've started, but a little bit more about your background in IoT.
Sure. So I started with General Data Tech almost 3.5 years ago. Came on board and really built out the legal department here. Started with just sort of getting our contract processes and our things formalized. And it wasn't long after I started working here, maybe 6 months. I was in a meeting and somebody mentioned IoT, and if you're not active in the space, you're not active in tech, it's a little new to you. So I remember sitting in the meeting and I sort of quietly Googled IoT and found Internet of Things and Internet of Everything and Cisco and really, to be honest, kind of got bit by the bug. I was fascinated by it. I'd heard a little bit about M2M and obviously connected technologies, but this was a whole new space. And so I have really spent the last, I guess, 3 years trying to better understand IoT, from a business perspective, certainly from a legal perspective, what is required of lawyers that guide businesses in this space. And it's been really exciting. I'm very lucky now. I get to talk on this a little bit. I get to pull back the curtain for groups that have never heard of IoT before. I have given a number of talks now and on IoT, and it's fun and it's fascinating to stand in front of a group and say, okay, here's a connected shoe, and here's why that's not just novel but valuable, or here's a device that is implantable that will release medicine, and here's the problem that solves, along with the risk that it creates. There's some really interesting things happening, but they have to be sort of facilitated deliberately so that we can all do them right and do them safely.
Yeah, plan in advance. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like, you're an evangelist, a tech, what do you say? Well, a techie. I'm still going to call you techie.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll take that.
and a legal wizard. But tell us an interesting fact that maybe most people don't know about you, though.
So when I get asked this question,
which is all the time.
It's from time to time it comes up, and when I was just 6 or maybe 7 years old, my dad, who was a double E.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what the real smarts.
It's hereditary.
Yes. Carl moved us to Tehran in 1977 when I was just 6 or 7 years old. And for work for Rockwell. Rockwell was there. And the interesting things was I lived in Tehran for 2.5 years immediately before the Iranian Revolution. So I have some really, I was young, but I have some very interesting memories of some really special and wonderful people in Tehran helping our family, even as things got very violent and very, very bad there for the communities in Tehran. I literally remember playing next door to the Shah's palace, and this is the beginning of my early criminal history. I was apprehended by the Shah's police because I was 6 years old playing with a toy gun next to the Shah's palace, which apparently is a no-no. So I have an early background in being a very global thinker. And I am very grateful to my parents. They exposed me to some very worldly things for when I was very young, and that really still is part of who I am today in the way that I look at business and business opportunities and community more broadly. So,
yeah, no, I agree with that philosophy. It leaves an imprint, and I don't know. Coincidentally, my mother's sister's family, we were always very, very close. They too were in Tehran. Just before the revolution.
Wow.
They too were helped by, very, very nice Iranian people to actually get out of the country when things started going wrong. He worked for a mining company. After that point, he was an expat. They were in Africa. They were in Ghana. Wow. They were in Brazil. and sort of went all around the world, and then they've relocated, or he's since passed away, but the rest of the family, and they're pretty much sisters to me. They live in Vancouver now, so that's interesting. I didn't know that we had that in common to a certain extent.
That was very much part of my story as well. I remember they had closed the Toronto International Airport as things got worse, and our driver, who had helped us for I guess a year or 2 years, came in the middle of the night and said that it's time. And my mom and my sister and Dad stayed behind to help some other families, but my mom and my sister and I got in the car, went to the airport, got on the plane. And I remember sitting on my mom's lap because I didn't have a seat. My mom's lap, and as the wheels left the ground, everybody on the plane threw their hands up and rejoiced that we'd gotten out. So, even at a young age, it does leave an imprint.
Yeah, and not to get political, but now the circle's kind of closing in a sense with Iran rejoining, I guess, the world population or the world community.
Very true.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into IoT, the thing that we love. And I just want to start high level, maybe. But what are some of the basic legal issues that managers that they should be planning for before they actually launch their business or their product line with respect to IoT and the legal ramifications? Yeah,
I honestly believe that the predominant legal issues, and there are many, but the predominant that surround IoT, particularly as you develop opportunities and solutions, have to sort of surround privacy and security, right? What I always tell people is the exciting thing about IoT is that it enables some really amazing solutions, and hopefully we'll get a chance to get into some of that. But of course, the problem, and it is a corresponding problem, is that by definition, an IoT system, it does a couple of things. It creates a tremendous amount of data, much of that personal information data, PI data, and it also, by definition, creates a number of new access points to that data. Right. So, the very thing that makes these systems phenomenal and interesting and powerful are the very things that can create all kinds of problems. On the privacy front, we're here in 2016, and I don't remember what the numbers are, but in 2016, the number of connected devices, somewhere around 10, 12 billion maybe. Most projections are that by the time we hit 2020, depending on who you ask, it's north of 50 billion connected devices. But as we sit here today at 10 or 12 billion connected devices, or somewhere in that ballpark, we hear about a breach of security and the leak of someone's data almost regularly. I mean, the ones that actually make the news once every couple of weeks probably is the pace.
No, you're saying in IoT or in IT?
Just in general. Just
yeah.
So the challenge is that as we get as IoT permeates the IT landscape more, and it will, because that's this is the direction. Now you add 40 billion additional connected devices. You're going to have a landscape where breach is the norm, if it isn't already. Right. The basic legal issue then surrounding the IoT and the development is whose data is being collected, what data on each of those people on the subject is being collected, where are you storing that data, how are you processing that data, is it domestically stored, or is it across the pond stored to implicate a different regulatory scheme? The privacy side of that is really a phenomenal legal issue. And what I try to share with my colleagues who practice and who are anywhere near this space is, look, you've got to become more learned on the privacy side. You've got to get a sense for what regulation applies, what agencies play in your space. Is it HIPAA? Is it DOL? Is it OCR? What in your specific industry, if you're in healthcare or finance or Gramm-Leach Bliley, GLB, you have to know what privacy applies, because IoT is going to implicate that in a big way. The security side.
But now to go back to the privacy side, now what you're saying here is your advice then is to just become more self or legal aware of the regulations that might be in place, the laws that they interpret that might be in place. Is that what you're saying, or is there something more than that?
And importantly, the agencies that regulate, right? Because in the United States, we do not have one overarching privacy framework. Right. We look to the FTC to be a primary player, but I was joking with a colleague of mine the other day. Then, if you want a list of agencies that administer privacy regs, you'd be better off asking which ones don't.
Okay, really?
DOL, DOC, DHS. I mean, if it has a D in front of it, they have a privacy scheme. And so if you're a lawyer and you play in this space at all, or if you guide clients, whether you're in private practice or you're an in-house lawyer, you have to have some knowledge. Even if you're a generalist, which is my background, you have to have some knowledge about who regulates, right? So obviously, if you're an in-house lawyer at a healthcare provider, or you're a lawyer that's guiding healthcare institutions, you have to know HIPAA and what privacy schemes are in place in HIPAA. And then you have to know enough about IoT to put those two together. So you're at least asking the right questions.
Right. Okay.
So my advice, and it really is, to use your word a minute ago, evangelizing. Some lawyers in particular like to sort of say, okay, those are IT issues. I'm the lawyer. The two are merging at a rapid pace, and lawyers do themselves a great service if they will, not become necessarily a subject matter expert on it, but at least get very learned very quickly on what applies in your particular business.
Because of liability reasons, right?
You can't guide somebody on how to manage and mitigate risk if you don't appreciate where that risk is.
Yeah. Okay. So privacy, this makes sense to me, in the sense of PII. We've discussed how, the who, what, when, how of data, asking all those questions. And I think, I don't know if you can help me out here, but I think I saw, and I like to put this in the show analysis notes, but a link to, isn't there a place where we can find all these agencies on one place, or are you aware of that, or do I need to search for that?
I don't know what the link is. I can tell you that I've seen a slide on it because I'm
okay, maybe I saw the same slide. But anyway, I'll try to find that link. But what I was going to say is, the privacy side makes sense. Then you're getting into the security side. Now, I would think security is a tech issue. How is that? And privacy would be its counterpart on the business risk side or the legal side. Why don't you continue on the security side?
Yeah, so it's got some of the same issues, right, in terms of the technology of keeping things secure, but the risk on security, whether it's info security or cybersecurity, once you, again, same setup. Once you've got all this data and you've got multiple devices creating access points. I mean, if you think about any kind of given system, talk about a smart parking lot, for example.
Yep.
So in a smart parking lot solution, the traditional parking lot it's a big asphalt space with no tech, and maybe the new tech is you've got some place where you pop your credit card in to get a thing you put on your dash.
Sure.
Now, of course, what we have is we have a parking lot that has a sensor in each space. I think the current there's some out there that are sort of what I call almost smart, which is they have a green light or a red light to tell you as a person, which space is open. But obviously what's coming next, and we've seen in some, I think, European countries, is where the parking space talks to your car, right? You turn in and your car will display that if you go straight up 2 more rows, turn left, go down a couple of rows, there are 3 spaces on your right, and the car just tells you where to go because the parking lot is talking to your car. That's a nice value add, right? And actually, beyond just being convenient, helps to limit emissions because you're not circling and believe it or not, limiting emissions 1 car at a time, thousands of cars per month, tens of thousands per year in multiple. You're starting to talk about a real environmental impact. Again, great value add. The problem, of course, is now you've got a sensor, you've got connectivity, you've got a car with now an access point into the car. Last year we saw the I love this phrase, by the way, the ethical hackers at Wired, who demonstrated that they could hack remotely, which was remotely hack a Jeep.
Yes.
So
the entertainment system within the
Yep,
Jeep.
they went through the infotainment system and got to the mechanics of the car, were able to manipulate the clutch and some other things. So it's a great example of, here you've got this really important and valuable IoT solution that creates a lot of opportunities for bad guys. So if you're somebody like me, who maybe you're helping to develop the IoT solution, or you're guiding a client that is doing that, walking through that solution and talking about where you might get attacked is important. Having a CISO from the company to walk through, they use the tech, you bring the law, to talk about where the risk points are. So if you're a learned lawyer in IoT, you can ask the questions about, okay, so what happens if somebody gets into the car and they trace it back because somebody was using your parking lot to get into the cars, and then they've gotten into a number of cars, or they've uploaded ransomware into every car into your parking lot over a period of 6 months, and now 6 months later they're sending messages on the infotainment system saying you can have your car back as soon as you wire 10,000 in Bitcoin to this account.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's some pretty, that scenario sounds pretty attenuated, but it's not. Last week a hospital in California paid $17,000 on a ransomware attack. Right. That was not IoT related, but it's IT related. And since more and more of this will be IoT and connected systems, lawyers have to be able to speak to this. They don't have to be the SME on the tech, but they have to at least be able to say, what happens what if you get attacked here? What if somebody does this? What if you get an attack here? And then what type of data are you collecting? Where are you storing it? Who is storing it for you? I mean, have you decided to do on-prem storage, or are you utilizing a cloud provider? How did you choose your cloud provider? Where are they located? Where is their data center? Is it in Des Moines, or is it in India or China? You have to at least be able to ask these questions so that you can raise the legal issues early on in the process, and then allow your client to build an IoT solution that's both valuable but also secure and addressing privacy concerns.
Okay, and so I want to tease this apart a little bit more. Privacy and security, sometimes they're conflated together, which, I think listeners to this podcast know. Privacy is more of a business issue because it's more related to risk. Security is more technology. However, what we're talking about here is risk associated with a breach in security. So what I'm wondering is, isn't privacy kind of a subset of this as well? Because it's basically the result of a breach as well, and it just means that they're able to the bad guys are able to get PII, public, personally identifiable information based on that breach. So I don't know if I'm asking this question properly, but aren't we just talking about security and different types of risks? And one of those risks is the risk of privacy because of certain regulations that are in place, certain laws that are in place. Other risks are, like you say, perhaps they can hack into the car because of the parking lot, and they can crash it, or they can do some other nefarious activity. But just explain that to me, because I think it'd be useful to hear it coming from you.
Well, so what you've keyed in on is the security side of things, which definitely applies in both spaces, right? If a company is not identified what information it has, where it's storing it, and then take steps to secure it, then you're going to have an issue. Where the privacy side gets a little different than cybersecurity or information security is much more about what's your policy internally about what you're going to do with the data, what are you going to collect, how long are you going to keep it, what are you going to do with it, and then what have you told your consumers about that information, right? So the issue is, if you're an IoT solution development company, or you're putting together products or services in that space, the question is, what's your policy internally? What have you decided to do? Are you going to collect PI? Are you going to store it? How long are you going to store it? Company has to decide that as they develop the product or service, right? Then, of course, you have to tell people what your stance is. and obviously give them the opt-in or opt-out, or in very limited circumstances, the no option notice. But here's what we do when you come into our garage. So let's say there's an app on your car and you've opted in to continue that example. When you come in here, this is what your car will do, and this is the information that we gather on you or your car when you're here, or that we don't. And here's what we're going to do with it. We're going to use it to send you targeted ads based on American Airlines or Southwest Airlines, or because you're at the airport at a certain time in our parking lot, for example. And we're going to use that to do targeting ads. And by the way, if you don't want that, here is your opt-out opportunity. And certain states and certain regulatory agencies have different requirements along that lines. But that's the difference here. One is certainly security and securing whether it's private information or even non-private information, but a security or cybersecurity posture. The other on privacy really is, what are you committed to doing with that data, and what have you told your customer about it, and what options have you given them? So there's some overlap, but some differences as well.
Okay, and maybe another way to look at it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is privacy and security also related to how you mitigate that risk. With security, how you mitigate that risk is do the best that you can with the technology, with the contractual tools that you have, for using that technology. And then mitigating the risk on the privacy side, you say there's a whole, and which I agree, there's this whole the rules, they're internal rules, and it's almost like security is to keep the bad guys away from your information, and privacy rules are to keep the good guys, that being the external versus the internal people, away from the information, or at least using it in the proper way. So it's just, can I look at it that way?
Yeah.
That privacy just has a little bit, there's just a little bit more to it that you can do with rules to mitigate the risk, versus security is mitigating the risk is more technical, although there is a contractual side too.
That's fair. But the one thing to be sure that we sort of flesh out on the privacy side, there are ways to approach that in terms of best practices and self-regulation. It may be that you want to be sure you have a privacy policy, that it's just a good idea to do that. Then there are some spaces where it's required, that you absolutely have to have a privacy policy that is memorialized.
Back to the regulations, right?
Yes.
Back to the regulatory
There
bodies.
are certain schemes that require that, and then that you give proper notice to your consumer, whether it's through the website or through an app or another medium, and that you give them the opt-in or opt-out, or as it is in some, again, limited circumstances, just no option but a notice. That's very rare, but it's still there. But that's the important point is, depending on what space you play in, you have to know what your obligation is on the privacy side, because the agencies have been very aggressive on this. The FTC in particular has made no bones about it. Chairwoman Ramirez has made IoT a very important part of her platform. They have absolutely identified themselves as I would say, the key consumer-facing regulator in IoT. So understanding what their direction is, particularly on the privacy side, is really important.
Now, and you mentioned something that I want to tee off on is there's kind of self-regulating, and then there's government regulating. And the best practice right now, in many cases, sometimes you have to do it, is to self-regulate with these different rules, these different internal policies. Where do you think we are? From what I've heard, the government, at least in the U.S. Now we've got a worldwide audience, but at least in the U.S. and it's maybe a little bit more aggressive, and maybe you can talk to this in Europe, but it's pretty hands off. I mean, there's been guidance, but there's no real laws yet that are enforcing the details. It's still pretty high level. Am I interpreting that correctly? And where do you think this is going?
So I think that's accurate. We talked about how privacy right now doesn't have an overarching, in the U.S. anyway, there's no one body that creates privacy law. And certainly with IoT, it's even newer, if you will, to the space. So there really is a little bit still wild west in terms of IoT solutions. But and it's a big but, where I think it's going. I think you are absolutely going to see additional structure, additional rules, additional regs. You've already seen it from the Federal Trade Commission. They had their first IoT enforcement action, I want to say 2 years ago with maybe it was 3 years ago now with a baby monitor.
Yes.
They have been, I would even say not just aggressive, but actually very good about giving guidance in this space. They are in many ways out front with their opinions. I think if I remember last year, they created a specific IoT, I want to call it a working group that's job is to research and surface issues surrounding consumer-facing IoT products and services. So I think that you're going to continue to see agencies be more aggressive with promulgating rules and regs. The question about the future that I have is from a federal legislative standpoint. It's pretty clear, and this is not necessarily IoT specific, but it's pretty clear that there is movement, not just in the current administration, but on the Hill to get more cybersecurity legislation passed.
Okay.
We've seen more legislation produced. The president just last week included in his budget a lot of additional money towards cybersecurity. Again, not specific to IoT, but obviously affecting IoT.
Sure.
The real question, though, is, and again, not specific to even technology. Right now the Hill is Congress and the administration are incredibly divided. Generally, there's been not a lot of things that can get done on the Hill, even when people agree on the need for cybersecurity. The information security, the CISA Act, which was just passed, took 2 years, a year and a half, and even then had to be included in an omnibus bill that a lot of people were unhappy about, but they were forced to vote for it because the privacy advocates thought it would basically allow the government to get access to your information. So you asked me where I think it's going. I think there's going to be a lot of additional regulation because you're just talking about so many things that will be impacted in terms of more data, more devices, more access points. But I do think that it's going to be an uphill battle for people wanting to get that legislation passed, simply because it's hard to get any legislation passed right now, at least for the foreseeable future up in Washington. So I think that's kind of where we're headed right now.
So what you're saying is you think there'll be more laws passed, and then from those laws, more regulations developed that's going to provide, I guess, more fidelity in what we as listeners to this podcast and entrepreneurs and enterprises that are developing IoT solutions need to be guided by. Is that what you're saying?
I think you're definitely going to see more regulations. I don't know that you'll see a lot more legislation.
Okay.
Because I think it's easier for the existing bodies to promulgate regs.
Yes.
Than it is to get authorizing legislation. So I think that the holdup will be on the authorizing side of things, but I don't think that will stop entities like the FTC or the FCC on the telecom side or others in addressing this. Some would say that they need to. Others would say they may not be the best position to do that. But I think that's where you're going to end up. And, if you go a little bit even farther than that, I think you're going to see a lot more litigation around it as businesses sort of challenge those schemes. But, it's such an open space and so many things that weren't previously contemplated that
Wild, Wild West, baby.
It really is. It just, the technology is so far ahead of even legislation that is currently being thought up, that it's really going to be difficult for them to do that. But I think that's going to be the environment going forward.
So if that is the environment going forward, what's the takeaway for our listeners here? What should they take away from that with respect to their business?
What I've tried to do both here at my company and then in my community with fellow general counsel and other in-house lawyers, I've always been a big believer in being active, not just in the compliance side, but even before the rules are written, and participate in the development side. So, when the FTC sits down and decides that it needs to write a new rule, and when it does so in the IoT space, what it will do is it'll solicit comment. It's a fairly long-term process. There's a rulemaking process. They solicit comment. They have hearings. They invite people to participate. What my guidance has been is get active in that side. If you're not the smartest guy or gal in the room on IoT or IoT risk mitigation, find someone who is that can speak on your behalf with your particular industry in mind. Those opportunities are there. They're there at the state level. Here I'm in Texas. Our legislative body is active once every 2 years. They're in session for about 5 months. There's plenty of work that happens in the interim 18 months. We should be at those hearings, speaking to those issues, whether they are cybersecurity, whether they are IoT, whether they are privacy. If you're concerned about a rule, or you want to be sure a rule is enacted properly, so that it actually sort of takes care of the bad actors, but allows good, honest businesses to do a good job for their consumers. Participate in those conversations, because regulators really do. I'm convinced. My experience has been they really do provide opportunities for that. Do they always listen to you? No. But if you don't at least show up and ask to be included, then you can. It's hard for you to complain on the other side, going, this is not a fair rule, because we really do. We have the right expertise. Lawyers, I think, are well positioned to help draft legislation, help write rules, help provide insight, get the experts in front of regulators and elected officials. Participate in that conversation, so that when the IoT rules are written, they're at least written with some input from business and the business community.
Right. And I think, practically speaking, if you're a startup, maybe participation means just read what's going on or be aware of what's going on, right? Because not everyone's going to have the ability to actually devote that amount of time to this particular subject.
You're right. I mean, look, there's a sort of a spectrum of what involvement means. If you have the resources, you can go down to your state capital, you can hire a lobbyist, you can engage them and have them visiting committee members. That may make sense for some providers, and it might fit the budget for some businesses. Others may not be in a position to do that, and I'll tell you what my advice for those folks have been. Then access your trade group. Trade associations are fantastic at representing large numbers, particularly of small and medium-sized businesses. So where you, if you guide a small business, or you're in-house at a small or medium-sized business, if you don't have a government affairs department or the resources to hire a lobbyist, then go to your trade group, trade association, and say, hey, I understand there's some technology and IoT-related legislation that is being contemplated. What are you guys doing about it? Have you hired anybody? Can you represent us? Those trade groups a lot of times exist primarily for that purpose, and they can be really instrumental to show up and suit up and guide what ultimately gets enacted. No,
that's great advice, John. And I think you're whatever space you're participating in, there will be a trade group there. So great advice. Right. Now, so is there anything else? We've extensively talked about privacy and security, and I think for good reason. But any other basic legal issues that our listeners need to be aware of?
It's interesting. One of the things that I have seen, particularly in some of the IoT opportunities that we participated in, consumers, businesses, whether they are municipalities or private enterprise, they're doing what they normally do, which is they're trying to get some monetary consistency in their budgets going forward. So when they're buying an IoT solution, they want to know, they're oftentimes looking for, I would say, a price lock, or, what's this going to cost me, and what's it going to look like? And oftentimes these are multi-year projects, right? So I've got, I have a number of these solutions that I need to purchase. This is what I want to do, and it's going to be over the next 24 to 36 months. And so they ask their providers, what does the solution look like, and what does it cost? And I want to know this is what it's going to cost, and not a penny more. The problem, of course, if you talk to anybody in IoT, lawyers, engineers, solutions architects, it's incredibly difficult to agree to some of those things because of the newness of where we are, right? So the energy solution that exists today in a say a smart shoe, for example, it can and will be dramatically different from what that solution looks like 12 months from now, let alone 24 months or 36 months. So as a provider or a developer of a solution, you have to be really careful about what you agree to now, knowing that the earth is going to shift underneath you, in the very near future. So I try very hard to counsel and guide my clients. Try and give your customer what they're looking for, but be sure everybody's being reasonable, because if you get locked into something and whether it's the technology shifts or whether there's a new rule or reg that gets promulgated that dramatically increases your cost, you don't want to be excited to be an IoT provider, but upside down in your ability to be profitable. There's nothing exciting about being that company.
I agree. And again, what you're advocating here is a different form of risk management. And can you maybe give us an example of this to, drive this more home as to what should we be looking at from a legal point of view, so that we're not locked in when the technology changes, so we cannot, be profitable, as you're saying.
So here's a really interesting example. There's a municipality that I'm aware of that is trying to develop a solution, an IoT connected device solution for the monitoring of certain chemicals and gases that run in the pipes in their city. And IoT is really well positioned to do this now. You can put really great sensors on the pipes, in the pipes, even sometimes in what is being carried in the pipes. Those sensors can communicate to connected devices and provide real-time data, oftentimes before there are issues. You can do predictive analytics. There's some really cool stuff that's happening, right? So you've got this great solution. Two of the things that you have to have, of course, and again, this is me being just a little on the tech side, right? You got to have power and you have to have connectivity. Right. So in 2016, the power and the connectivity solutions that exist are where they are. They're sort of known. This is what you can do. This is what you have. And so if you're a provider and you're trying to put this together, then this is the product that you have access to put into your solution. And so you might price it, okay, this is what it's going to cost me in 2016 to buy this. Here's what I need to buy 10,000 of them to monitor however many miles of pipe you have running underneath your city. And from a connectivity standpoint, we'll run fiber or whatever it is to do that. 12 months from now, 24 months from now, I'm already reading some articles about wireless power being a much more not only reliable but beneficial and efficient driver of IoT solutions. From a connectivity standpoint, earlier this year we started to hear about a new Wi-Fi application, a new Wi-Fi medium that will allow for transmission through walls and in some underground solutions. We don't have that yet, but we know it's coming. So if you're guiding a business, developing a solution that's going to be great in 2016, but not necessarily relevant or the right solution in 2018, you can't provide them guidance on price lock agreement on SLAs. That's a real example of how do you guide the business to put a solution that works together today in an environment that's going to be dramatically different tomorrow.
Right. So let's look at it both from the buy and the sell side. What is your advice in that particular case on the buy side, and what is your advice in that particular case on the sell side?
So if you're buying an IoT solution, right, you certainly want to have a partner that wants to be open and authentic and genuine with you on what's today and what's tomorrow. Because the last thing you want is to have somebody come in and sell you something that, oh yeah, this is great, this is what's going to be your technology for the future, and then 12 months later you're locked into this contract, and your IT guys start to read about the new and greatest thing that is so much better and reliable and cost efficient, but you've got to report back to your CEO that, well, sorry, we can't have that. We bought this last year. So from a buyer, you want to choose a partner that not only is genuine with you about the current state of things, but also is interested in being your long-term player. I truly believe, and I'm very fortunate that our company plays that way, that we have very open and honest discussions with our customers about, we can sell you this, but look, this is where this is going. If you're going to build a product or a solution or an IoT system for the next decade, this is probably where you want to be. This is what you want to consider. So from a buyer side, be sure you select the right partner to have that conversation. Do your homework, do your own research into where the things are going that you're contemplating purchasing. And then on the sell side of things.
But before you go there, though, John, so just to how that manifests itself legally, if I'm interpreting what you're saying properly, you're saying, yeah, have this honest partner. But from a contractual point of view, what honesty means is giving yourself some legal wiggle room so that if things do change, and again, I'm still pretty abstract here, but I'm trying to get it down. But if things do change, you're not locked in at a certain price for a certain type of technology. Is that kind of what you're saying?
So it's yes, and it's a real balancing act. And you've actually reminded me of an interesting real world example that I guess you could call it an IoT ecosystem or not, but you may have read recently American Airlines sued its in-flight Wi-Fi provider GoGo.
Oh, no, I didn't.
It was 2 weeks ago, and then they've actually dismissed the suit, I want to say a couple of days ago, but they had a contractual provision, American being in their contract with GoGo, that said basically that if a newer, faster in-flight Wi-Fi solution becomes available, that American would have to give notice to their provider, to GoGo, and GoGo would have basically a cure period in which to provide a similar or better solution from a tech side. And if they failed to do that, then American could get out of their contract. But there was a notice and cure period. Again, this is from what I'm reading. I don't represent either of them. I'm not intimately familiar, but this is what I've read in the news reports. And American tried to do that. Apparently, GoGo disputed that there was such a technology available. So American sued them, effectively using a lawsuit to provide the notice. And so now they are in this, I think, 45-day period where GoGo has to come back and meet the existing technology, which is being used. I want to say it's Viasat or someone else, but it's being used by other airlines like United and so. So there are some tools. This is a great example of
I think that is a great example.
You say you've got, when they got into this with GoGo may well have been the cutting edge technology for that application, but American had the and their lawyers had the foresight to say, we know this is an emerging space with emerging tech, and we're going to want to have some flexibility. So I think there are tools you can use contractually to ensure your client has that.
Yeah, excellent. I think our audience there should be jotting down whatever the words that you mentioned, that you kind of paraphrased, that you read. But I think that's gold. Let's talk about the buy side. The sell side. So now I'm selling something. I want to mitigate my liability as well. So what's your advice on the sell side?
So you have to. Maybe the most important thing in this space, and I'm drawing on it because of what GDT does. GDT is not a manufacturer. We are a value-added reseller, right? So our business
and a system integrator.
Yeah, right? And a systems integrator. So what we do is we buy and resell the latest Cisco hardware, EMC, VMware, HP, and a number of others. They're the manufacturers. They're the OEM. For a seller, particularly in the IoT space, I think it may be the most important risk mitigating approach is to select your right provider, select the right partner. There are so many IoT startups who have literally rushed to market with the latest and greatest technology or application or big data analytic program. There are so many right now. In fact, I think I read last year that if you look at all of the new IoT providers, more than half are startups, which is exciting.
Makes sense where we are in the evolutionary path.
Absolutely does, and it's exciting because a lot of those are not burdened by huge bureaucracies. They can be flexible. They can be incredibly innovative. That's exciting. But if you're for our perspective, the general contractor on some of these projects, you have to be really careful about who you get into bed with. Not just the latest, greatest, and most interesting solution or product or service, but somebody that has decided that security is part of their culture, that protecting privacy is part of who their identity is in terms of the provider. If it's a cloud provider that you are reselling and bringing to bear for your consumer, Is this a fly-by-night cloud provider? Is this AWS?
But John, isn't this more on the buy side again? Buy side advice in the sense of who you're getting in the bed with is you're saying who you're going to be buying from.
Well,
or what do you mean from the sell side?
So I mean from that. So I see what you're saying. So what I'm saying is that a lot of these solutions don't get brought to the buyer by multiple parties. They are oftentimes like we come to it.
Yes. Okay. Yes,
so,
that's true.
So you're right. From a customer's perspective, you have to buy the right. But from my perspective as a seller, I want to be sure I'm selling the right thing.
Okay, I got you.
That I'm selling the reliable, secure solution. That I have the right partners involved. And again, from a lawyer's perspective, there's so many ways to come at this. Does your contract protect the seller? Has liability been shifted? Where does that liability lie for if your sub is defaulting? I guess that's how I was approaching it in terms of what you're selling.
Right. No, that makes sense. And again, how that manifests itself is contractually or what?
It absolutely can. It can be a contractual approach. It also can be just appreciating what regs and rules apply to the service that you're providing.
And just make sure they fit, kind of.
Yeah, who ends up on the hook for what? Certainly on the breach side of things. One of the reasons that I got into cybersecurity to begin with was an understanding that as a seller of technology, a lot of the largest cybersecurity and data breaches have occurred not direct attacks on systems, but through vendors. I thought Target and Home Depot were good examples. So we're a vendor, we're a seller, and
good point.
The last thing that I want to see in the IoT space or any other space is some article in the press about some big company had a breach and breach traced back to my company's sale of the service or the product. So my advice for lawyers that are guiding sellers is have an eye towards that. Understand what that max risk is, how you could end up in that vulnerable space, and then build your risk mitigation practices around it, whether that's an incident response plan, whether that's training for your employees, whatever you identified as that risk ultimately at the end of the sales cycle, that's what you ought to be building your practices around at the beginning.
No, that's great advice. And I think even if you're not a lawyer advising businesses and you are a business manager, this is also something to think about.
Absolutely.
And to consider. And let's go down this path a little bit. Since you mentioned mitigating risk, and you were saying ways to do that is your response, potential training. Just more general, if we pop up a little bit, how does an enterprise mitigate the risk, let's say, of a security breach, or what is in general, if that's possible, what's some guidance that you can give our listeners to mitigating this type of risk?
So I truly believe and am an advocate for ensuring that companies, providers of all sizes, have a formal information security program in place. It's so amazing.
What does that mean?
So it basically means that you've sat down, that you've audited where you are internally in terms of where your risk is. It's very granular, right? What data are you collecting, if any? Where are you storing it, as we talked about? How are you delivering it? And then what are your threat vectors, right? Are you really a company that's worried about Chinese hackers? Or are you more concerned about a malicious insider or a disgruntled former employee that has credentials?
Good point.
Having a formal information security program that is well thought out, that is targeted into your industry, that is memorialized in writing, and that includes, by the way, training, so that you've been able to say to your employees, "Look, we are." Phishing or spear phishing attacks, that you've basically trained your people on how to recognize those, and incident response plan is part of that program. So that here's what you don't want to do, right? Is you don't want to get a call from your CTO that says, "Hey, I think we have a problem. We found something, and we think it's been there for a long time," and have everybody look around and go, "Oh, well, what do we do?"
Now what?
Right? And it's
right.
Unfortunately, a lot of companies are in that place. What you really want is you want to literally be able to walk over the wall, break the glass, grab the plan and say, okay, we're ready. We trained for this. What do we do? Down to the point where you've trained on it and had drills, where you have an incident response plan and you've literally had a drill where there are firms that will do this. You can hire them to run your drill. You call everybody up at 9:00 at night and say, we've got a problem. Who gets the phone calls? Where do they meet? How fast do they get on the line? Do you have all the cell phone numbers? I mean, how can you get a hold of everybody? If you can't get a hold of this person, then who else do you talk to? Has it already broken in the press? So who is your outside PR consultant that will help you to control and deliver your message?
Good advice.
It's so incredibly important, and I really want to make the point. Almost every company is a data company now.
That's right.
And this will be increasingly so as IoT grows, right? Because again, 50 billion, 60 billion, 100 billion connected devices, more and more solutions will involve IoT ecosystems. That means you're going to be in the data business. It means you're going to have and process data. So the best way to mitigate your risk is to know where you're vulnerable, have a plan for it, and then have a plan for how to deal with it. I truly, truly believe that.
Okay, that's great, and I agree. And that's all part of a manager's job is risk management. And so to label it or to name it, that is formally called an information security program.
I think what's the last one? Information management program, I think, is what I've seen called. I mean, it's a couple of different names, but I always refer to it as an information security program.
Excellent. All right, John. Well, I think this has been awesome. I mean, I like your perspective, a lot of practical advice. Where can people find out more about you and GDT?
So our company's website, we are gdt.com. Easy to find us. We're on Twitter at GDTWire is our Twitter handle. For me, easily enough, I'm on Twitter at John Ansbach. I'm also on LinkedIn, and when I can find the time, I'm very happy to publish a technology blog. Ansbachblog.com is where I publish on IoT and cybersecurity. So I'm happy to get connected to people and talk more about this important and exciting topic.
Excellent. Well, I'll put all that in the show analysis notes. And with that, I'll say thanks, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bruce, thank you so much.
Okay. That was a good talk with John Ansbach. This podcast goes vertical, deep diving into different topics each week. If you prefer a more horizontal and structured approach to learning IoT business and its orbiting technologies, check out my book IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, or become a certified IoT professional by completing the ICIP training and certification program. For details, just go to www.iot-inc.com. Also go to www.iot-inc.com for an analysis of this episode, links to things that were mentioned during the episode, and very importantly, the episode's PDF transcript. Just search for the name of the episode or the guest. If you're new to this podcast, subscribe. That way you'll get every week's episode delivered straight to your device. Or, if you've been listening for a while, there are 3 ways you can support the show. You can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes. It only takes 1 click to leave a rating, a little bit longer to leave a review. You can share it on social. I'm on LinkedIn, to a lesser extent on Twitter. And of course, you can support the show by buying my book, IoT Inc., or the ICIP training and certification program. It's how I pay the bills. Next week's episode is Smart Homes and the IoT Ethos of the Jetsons with me. I hope you can join me then. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Till next week, may your path to IoT business be a regulated one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.